This episode of the show is brought to you from the salesman.org HubSpot studio. Welcome to the Social Selling Show. Myself, Will Barron, founder of salesman.org, and the king of social selling, Daniel Disney. Daniel, how's it going, mate?
Will, it is going good. This is the first time we've recorded in a couple of weeks. As you can probably tell, I'm in slightly new surroundings. We moved house. Settling in well, but certainly a chaotic few weeks.
Good. Well, you sound great. You look great. I'm sure the office/studio space, you've got big plans for it moving forward. So we look forward to seeing all that. And congratulations on the move. I guess it's probably the most stressful part of most people's lives, other than perhaps kids and things of that nature. Anything non-family related, I'm sure moving is right up there.
That and writing a book, Will, definitely.
Okay. So with that, we're going to talk about qualifying on this episode of the Social Selling Show, as I say it slowly so I can get my words out properly. But though that was also terrible English as I said that sentence. We're going to talk about qualifying. So Daniel, we can talk about Bant, MEDDIC. There's many different acronyms. Let's just touch on what qualifying the sale actually is before we then tie it directly to social selling. What is the qualification process?
Qualifying in its rawest form is just finding the right people to sell to and not wasting your time trying to sell to the wrong people that don't have the money, aren't interested, don't have the need, etc. And I have to admit, Will, of all the conversations I have with sales leaders over the last couple of months, qualifying has been pretty much top of the list, if not in the top 3 priorities for sales teams this year. Seems to be a real big focus point. So I'm really excited to dig into it because the whole sales qualification, marketing qualification, and obviously social qualification. Mm-hmm. I think it's a big gray area, and hopefully we can dig into some of the key themes around that.
So I'll ask you why that is in a second, because that might be an interesting kind of side topic to go down. But just for anyone who is completely unfamiliar, I typically use Bant, the acronym. There's unlimited acronyms. There's MEDDIC, and then people stick a P on the end and have MEDPIC and all kinds of things. But Bant is, do they have budget, authority? Do they have a need? Is there a firm timeline? If you can hit those boxes, you're pretty much on track. Different acronyms, different methodologies for different industries and deal sizes, but Bant is pretty well recognized. I think it was actually created in the 1950s. So there's 70 odd years worth of data and research behind it. But why do you think qualification is such a hot topic right now for yourself, Daniel, with the consulting and the training that you're doing?
I think a mixture of virtual selling, growing so much. It's a whole different environment. And I imagine it's one of many things that has probably been lost and forgotten throughout that process. But also, if I look across the sales industry over the last 5 years, qualifying hasn't been a big topic. It hasn't been one of the topics you see lots of authors writing about, lots of experts and influencers, creating content around. So I think it's been neglected, and I think it's now coming to a sort of a reality that salespeople, it's one of the most important parts of the sales process. And so, yeah, I think it's just jumped up the list through all various reasons, and rightly so.
It could be that, I know in my career in medical device sales, I only had a finite number of potential prospects to engage with. I only had a geographical location that I could work within. So I had to qualify hard, because otherwise I'm just going to waste a lot of time with people, especially when you go into in-person meetings, or you're inventing an in-person meeting by popping your head in the operating room door and saying, "Hi, I just happened to be here," trying to get a conversation going. Whereas now, maybe qualification's been less of priority in the fact that there is automated tools to just get your voice out there, and you're happy with a 1% reply rate if you can get enough of those emails and cold calls essentially spammed out there. So maybe qualification has become less important up until this point of the pandemic, whereas now the amount of people replying to cold emails and cold calls has significantly decreased. So maybe qualification is top of mind again. That is all anecdotal. There's no data behind any of that, but that could be, is that a fair assumption?
I think it is, Will, and especially as we're going to dig into social selling today. With social media, you're talking to pretty much an infinite audience of hundreds of millions of people. And for that very reason, it is even more important to think about qualifying, because you are going to be reaching people that might not be interested. And again, it's probably easier to not qualify properly on social media than it is via a phone call or an email. And I guess qualifying isn't one of the key topics, certainly, that I see a lot of social selling people talking about. But for everyone working in sales, you'll know how important it is. So yeah, I guess, as you say, in this new sales world that we're in, it's time to bring it back, I guess.
For sure. And if you are sick of being rejected, if you're sick of people ghosting you, if you're sick of people not replying to your messages, improve your qualification at the top of the sales process and you'll eliminate a lot of that at the far end of it. It makes everything easier. It's a little bit of work up front, but it does make everything else easier further on. Okay, so Daniel, I've never really pondered on this other than 5 minutes before our call here, before the conversation, right? Is there a difference between, let me take a step back. We often have a marketing qualified lead, which is someone who downloads a white paper, attends a webinar, goes to an event and puts their hand up. And they are often then qualified somewhat by marketing, typically not very well, and then they're passed to sales as a sales qualified lead. And sales teams will often have their own criteria to qualify them, otherwise they get bounced back, or sometimes just get lost within the CRM and never followed up upon. Where does, I'm going to invent this, if this might be a thing, but I'm not sure if it is. Where does a social qualified lead stand in all of this? Is it more towards a marketing qualified lead or is it more towards a sales qualified lead?
Well, I think a lot of this depends on the person. I don't know about you. I have always held as high a possible standard for a qualified lead for my own prospecting and the teams I've led. So for me, a lead isn't a lead unless there is, as you say, most of those criteria boxes ticked off. Do they have the money? Are you speaking to the person of authority? Do they have needs and time, etc.? I think with social, so maybe we'll call it, because obviously an SQL is a sales qualified lead. Maybe we'll call it a social selling qualified lead. And SQL, we can invent that here on this show.
It's funny, Daniel. It's funny you say that, mate, because I've literally got SQL, MQL on the pad of paper in front of me, and I was losing my own train of thought. So yeah, you've covered an important topic right there.
There we go. We've done it. I think, again, it's understanding your customers. Some people will probably say an SSQL is maybe someone they've connected to on LinkedIn. Is it someone you've sent a message to? Is it someone who's engaged in your content? Now, those, I guess, would lean more towards the MQL bracket of things. And then an SSQL that leans towards the sales qualified lead would be someone who does meet your criteria, who the conversation has gone towards more of a sales toned conversation, and you are identifying either a need or some sort of budget or authority, those type of things. So I think you'll have two types of social selling qualified leads, some that will factor in, because being connected to someone, starting a conversation, getting engagement from them, these are all positive steps, similar to downloading an ebook or a white paper. But then on the flip side, salespeople need to be leaning towards a higher level of qualification before you really start to think of it as an opportunity, a lead with real potential.
Sure. Okay. So are we, in hindsight, then overcomplicating this? Do we need to just get rid of SSQL and people we've connected with, sent a message but not had a reply from, or we've commented on their posts and they've commented on ours? Are they a marketing qualified lead? And then we've got to be very stringent with our criteria before we then consider them, whether it's just mentally in our head or internally within a CRM system, we qualify them as an SQL. In hindsight, should we just get rid of this SSQL and just have that defined split between the two, as if we are a combined marketer and sales team all in one unit?
As much as I'm now very attached to SSQL, I agree. Let's not overcomplicate it. I think maybe SSQL will just be good in an explanation perspective, but in reality, stick to your MQLs and your SQLs and just bring social selling and LinkedIn into it to understand what activities filter into each of those.
So I'll put you on the spot here slightly. Say you have someone reach out over LinkedIn, they've consumed loads of your content, they've been on your website, they are essentially a MQL and they're an inbound lead coming over to you. Would you try and qualify them over LinkedIn? So reply to the message and find out whether authority, need, time frame, budget, or would you immediately just try and get them on the phone? If you've got an instinct that they're probably going to be an SQL at some point, do you just get them off the platform on the phone and try and qualify them there?
Most of the time I'll try and get them off the platform. It will be a reply first, but the reply will be, shall we set up a phone call, a Zoom call, a Teams meeting, or a face-to-face, whatever it may be, where the conversation can be had in a much deeper context. I would say maybe 5% of the opportunities like that I get they want to stay on LinkedIn. And sometimes it is a case of just going back and forth a few messages and the deal can be done, again, depending on deal size, etc., and need. But yes, most of the time, take it offline where you can have a much firmer, stronger, deeper conversation and, yeah, potentially take it through to the next level.
For sure. And that's my experience as well. I find that a lot of tech startup founders, and a startup could still be outreach.io, you're doing hundreds of millions in revenue, right? It's still classed as a startup. When I'm engaging those individuals for either sales training on our platform at salesman.org, or more likely advertising space on the Salesman podcast, a lot of them will just want to do a deal back and forth over email. So you've got to be comfortable asking it shouldn't be a difficult question. People do find it difficult of, what is your budget for this quarter? How can, there's millions of ways to phrase it up, but essentially that's the question you're asking. It is sometimes appropriate to ask these questions over, I've never done it over LinkedIn, but over email. And we've got to respond to what the buyer wants, right? We've got to communicate on the platform at the cadence that they like.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many people are quite comfortable to talk about that on LinkedIn. And you can ask them, who is it that signs this off? What sort of budget do you have for this project, for this keynote, for this training, whatever it may be? And a lot of people are quite comfortable to talk about it on LinkedIn. And you would be surprised how many people, and also how far you can get in the sales process virtually, digitally as such. But again, I don't want to create a false picture. Probably for the majority of salespeople out there, the majority of your customers and prospects are probably going to be better off taking it outside of LinkedIn, getting them on the phone, getting them on a Zoom meeting where you can have a deeper conversation. Just don't discount people that might want to stay on LinkedIn for a bit longer.
Yeah, we can frame this up very easily from a perspective of our job is here to serve the customer, to add value to them, and sometimes that value can be in deal acceleration, going from pain point to pain being solved and shrinking that time as quick as possible. Now, if you're trying to do that via a LinkedIn message, when someone checks the LinkedIn once a day and you check it 2 or 3 times a day, that might take 3 weeks to get the messages across that you could have in a 5-minute phone conversation. So pushing that little bit to get people on the phone isn't always necessarily a selfish thing to do, even if someone seemingly does want to just communicate over email. And it could be, I've experienced this as well, people are nervous to be on the phone when they're just price shopping and they're never going to buy from you, and it's difficult, and they know that you're not going to be able to qualify them. They're more than happy to ask for pricing and information over a message, over email. So you've got to watch out for that as well, because clearly at that point, they're putting their hand up to say, I'm not qualified, when they are seemingly avoiding a phone call. So there's some nuance in all of this.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's going to be variations in the whole thing. But yeah, you are going to have a lot more ease and success if you can get them into having a real conversation. And again, just because when you're sending messages, you have a baseline of a relationship. But when you're on a phone call, they hear your voice, they hear your tone. When you're on a video call, they can see you, eye contact, body language. The depth of relationship goes further. So there are lots of advantages to taking it outside of that digital space. But as we continue to embrace technology, more and more people are more comfortable, a lot more comfortable when it comes to perhaps not speaking on the phone or jumping on a Zoom. And there will be people that they might say, yeah, let's book a meeting next week or 2 weeks time. Whereas actually, if you just spent 10 more minutes going back and forth on LinkedIn, you might have been able to do everything that call would have done, and maybe even get the opportunity or the sale instead of having to wait 2 weeks. So again, you have to play it by ear and make judgment calls based on each individual.
So on that point, something that I do religiously is set agendas for phone call meetings and virtual meetings, or whatever it is. I tend to, I don't know about yourself, Daniel, I tend to prefer a phone meeting than a Zoom meeting for a sales conversation most of the time. Typically, because I can do other stuff, I can research things as we're chatting on the screen in front of me. But what I do religiously is set agendas, and I forward that agenda the moment that the meeting is booked, because then we can follow up after that and say, hey, is there anything you'd like to add? And if they add a bunch of questions, a bunch of objections, typically I can solve them in an email or two before the meeting itself, so the meeting can go smoothly. Is there anything you want to add on that kind of level, Daniel? Is there anything that we've missed in this seemingly quick and seamless episode on qualifying via social selling? Is there anything else you want to add on that front?
Only on the flip side, I do exactly the same as you will, but I much prefer a video conversation, or a face-to-face in an ideal world. But yeah, video for me works better. I use the phone, a fair bit, but yeah, Zoom and Teams I find take it a little bit deeper. But I do the same, I guess, with LinkedIn. Those sort of conversations, you don't really often have time to prep or plan or set agendas, so you have to be ready to think on the spot and react quite quickly. You want to be responding. Think of it in the way that you would communicate with your friends and family. If you're texting people, you text quickly. You don't wait hours and hours to reply. And if you really want to capture that opportunity, you need to be ready to respond quite quickly. So you need to think on the spot. So you don't have the advantage of an agenda. You don't have the advantage of them giving you insights in what they need to know. You have to be ready to respond quickly. I guess the advantage, similar to what you're saying, Will, with being on the phone, is when you are messaging, you can have things open in the background to find information, to do your research, etc., as you're going. So yeah, it's a slightly different conversation. You need to be there and in the zone, but do it right, be very successful.
For sure. Because I like to lead with insights, like to have data on the screen, like to have facts on the screen. So that's why I prefer being on, and when I say a phone, it's usually a Skype call, right? But also, as I say this, and I can feel my leg twitching on the table here, I like to walk around on my sales calls. I have my AirPods in, and I like to just do laps around the house. So it's not always the fact that it's just kind of data in front of me. I find my conversations are more productive, they flow more easier. I can deal with objections in that kind of flow state a lot better when I'm actively moving. Now, as I'm just trying to imagine this, if I had my phone trying to walk, I'm going to make everyone sick as they're kind of watching the video and they're bouncing around, following me around. So yeah, there's multiple elements of that. And I'd be interested to know, I don't know who would do this. Maybe Gong or someone could look at the data of this, of success rates of a qualification call, a discovery call, something that isn't like the whole sales process. I would be interested to see the data on which is more successful, a phone call or a video call. I think that is I'd happily, if someone told me that you're more effective, 20% more effective, more likely to a deal to process and move forward over video, I'd be more than happy to shift to that. So I'd be interested to see the actual data on some of this.
It's a really good point, Will. I'm an animated talker as well, and I've always enjoyed a headset or AirPods or whatever it is and walking around. I do find that really helpful. So it's interesting you say that. I think I found myself doing more video calls throughout the last year for an obvious variety of reasons. But you make a very good point, and I would be equally interested to see if there is any data about success between both of them. I think there are advantages to each of them. It'd be curious to know, certainly in 2021, is there one that is better, or are they equally just as good?
For sure. It probably comes to, there's probably too many variables, but I will reach out to Gong, I'll reach out to Chorus as well, and anything that I can uncover on that front, I'll link to in the show notes of this episode. And with that was Daniel Disney, the king of social selling. My name is Will Barron. I'm the founder over at salesman.org, and that was an episode of the Social Selling Show covering qualification.
See you next time.